welcome. Very good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on Mirna on this big results day. We are getting you updated with all the latest trends and leads coming in from Bihar. Of course, the counting process is still on. It's going to be a slow and laborious process this time around, simply because the number of counting booths have increased substantially because of the pandemic. The booths numbers had to be increased in order to facilitate social distancing during the voting process as well. And therefore, with those increased numbers, we're told something around 35,000 addition made to the counting booth. So it's going to take that much longer this time around in the counting process. So the figures that we have indicate about 25% votes have been counted out of a total 4 crore votes. Just a short while ago, the Election Commission held a press briefing saying that the counting is going on smoothly and is likely to conclude only by this evening. However, trends so far indicate that NDA is comfortably surging ahead in the Bihar battle, crossing the halfway mark. Celebrations have already started at the BJP and JDU offices in Patna, with BJP clearly emerging as the single largest party, at least as of now. But let's remember that only 25% votes have been counted. My colleagues Shireen and Ayushman are right there on ground in Bihar to tell us more about what's happening. But first, let's listen into HR Srinivas, Chief Electoral Officer of Bihar.
4 करोड़ 10 लाख के आसपास में हम लोगों का वोट्स पड़े हैं और अभी तक हम लोगों का 92 लाख वोट गिना चुके हैं। पहले हम लोगों का नॉर्मली 26 राउंड का आसपास में होता था, एवरेज 25-26 राउंड का आसपास में। इस बार वो बढ़ करके करीब 35 राउंड हो गया, तो निश्चित रूप से हम लोगों का काउंटिंग देर शाम तक चलेगा।
My colleague Shireen Elizabeth joining me now from the BJP office in Patna. So Shireen, like we've been mentioning, the counting process is still on, but it seems the BJP workers are already in a jubilant mood. I would like to put in a word of caution, since we have the number. Seats with margins below 500 are at 22. Seats with margin below 1,000 are 46. So this is a very narrow margin that we are talking about for at least about close to 70 seats. So with those seats still, undecided, we cannot really, of course, celebrate. But still, what's the mood like over there in the BJP office in Patna?
Absolutely, it is too early for any of the party, in fact, to celebrate. But right now, where I am reporting from is the BJP office. If I ask my camera person, and show you, there are a huge cadres BJP office. Earlier morning, much people here. It was a big look, but now you can see have in fact number. Even if it's too early.
Okay, we have a bit of disturbance there. We'll try and reconnect with Shireen to show us around what's happening there. But we are getting reactions coming from important political voices. Manoj Jha of the RJD has expressed confidence of winning the elections, and he says that people have voted for change, and change is inevitable. Let's listen.
एक बात कागज पे नोट करके रखें, बदलाव हो रहा है, हम सरकार बनाने जा रहे हैं। और ये स्पष्ट तौर पे कहता हूं, क्योंकि आपके कुछ टेलीविजन चैनल में रियल टाइम डेटा नहीं आ रहा। अभी हम 86 सीट पे लीड कर रहे हैं इंडिविजुअली, लेकिन वहां आ रहा है 66। हम सीधे अपने वॉर रूम से, जहां ईवीएम की काउंटिंग हो रही है, वहां बात कर रहे हैं। गैप नैरो हो रहा है। कम से कम 70 ऐसी सीटें हैं जहां पास, और आपको यकीन के साथ कहते हैं, चंद घंटों बाद आपसे मिलेंगे, ये कहते हुए कि हमने जो कहा था वो कर दिखाया।
My colleague Aarti Subramaniam joining me from the Mumbai newsroom to actually bring us up to speed with the current status. So let's look at the picture as we know as of now. Aarti, of course, this is a developing scenario. Things are changing by the minute. Over to you to take us through the latest, please.
Well, that's right. Afrida, things are changing by the minute, and it's 2:04 on the clock right now, and the NDA is at 134. It's stabilized. It's been, by and large, this for the past hour and a half, plus minus a few seats here and there. But this is still, it's early trends, and that's just what everyone's saying. In fact, we don't see any gloating or over-the-top celebrations in any offices right now because they're still playing the wait-and-watch game. But nevertheless, where have these 134 leads come from? We're going to dive into that a little to understand these numbers, where they're coming from, and go into the specific regions from where they've got this money. This, of course, is the overall map of Bihar. As you can see, this is the current picture as of 2:04, where it is the BJP plus that's got 81, the JDU plus 53, RJD 62, the Congress 17, and the LJP 2. Now, let's go into each of these regions to find out where these numbers have actually come from. Let's start off actually with Bhojpur. And what happens is, and I just want to establish this before we go into the map so our viewers can actually look out for this trend. As we keep progressing along here, you will see how the NDA keeps doing better. And this also incidentally coincides with the phase-wise voting pattern. So the first is Bhojpur. Now, this is where the Mahagathbandhan has done well compared to the NDA. Now, let's look at the next phase, which is Magad. Next region, I beg your pardon, which is Magad. In Magad as well, it's another region where the RJD has done really well. This is another region again where overall you can say that the Mahagathbandhan has done reasonably well. The NDA has improved its performance compared to what it was in Bhojpur. And from here on, you're going to see the story change. The next region we're going to have a look at, and that's where the numbers actually begin to change. We'll have a look at Anga. Yeah, okay, sorry, if you can just have, yeah. You'll see the numbers slowly beginning to change, where you see an upward trend for the NDA compared to that of the Mahagathbandhan. This is where their numbers actually start to drop. The next region we're going to look at is Simanchal. And I think this is where the big story of the election really is. It is in this area which voted in the last phase, where the RJD was considered to be, it was supposed to be a cakewalk for the RJD, but just have a look at those numbers there. It is the NDA that has swept this area, leaving the RJD and the Congress far, far behind. This is the area where most of the analysis is going to center around. It was also the area that went to phase. In the third phase, it is also the area which has the Asaduddin Owaisi factor. Now, let's go to Tirhut, which is another area which the BJP has done substantially well in. This is the Tirhut area once again. The BJP, as you can see, along with the JDU, have done substantially well here compared to the RJD and the Congress combined. So it's a very clear map, and you can see there are just two specific areas where the Mahagathbandhan has done really well, and in all others, it's actually the NDA which has the upper hand entirely.
Right. Right, Aarti, thanks so much for giving us the overall picture. But like you've also warned us that this is changing by the minute, and we are, of course, going to keep our viewers updated. Joining me now on the broadcast, Tuhin Sinha, author and leader of the BJP, and also Vinay Tiwari, managing editor of Mir Now, joining us from the Mir Now studios. I would like to, before I go to Tuhin, Vinay, just one quick word from you. We've been saying things can change, but can you help us understand what are the inalienable truths at the moment? What are the things that you have drawn inferences from the picture that Aarti just showed us, which is likely to stick on? Will some of these leads that we are looking at stabilize, you think, from here on?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Election Commission has just told us just a short while back in a rather unprecedented, unusual briefing in the middle of a counting. That's not something we see very often, but I think they felt compelled to come out and explain, because the process is going on slightly slower, or at least seemingly slower than what one would have anticipated. I think they told us that only about 25% of the votes have been counted. Almost 75% are still left to be counted. Having said that, I think what is important to note is that for the last 2 hours or 2.5 hours or so, the tallies have by and large remained the same. So there is some amount of stability that has come in to the trends as they move along from round to round. So the NDA has been hovering around 125 and 135, and the MGB has been hovering around, the late 90s to possibly 104, 105, but they never really gone above the threshold. So I think one of the safe, inferences could be that it is likely to stay within that range. I don't see this completely going topsy-turvy unless there is something very dramatic which lies in store for us. I don't see that happening. So from that point of view, it should be fairly safe to assume that the NDA has done much better than what most of the pollsters who did the exit polls initially suggested. Except for one outlier poll which actually suggested something very different. Similarly, it also now is fairly clear that the MGB has underperformed much less than what people had anticipated. And of course, what remains to be seen, which we will probably know only when the detailed results come out later in the evening, is how much of a damage did the factors like LJP or AIMIM do to the fortunes of the different political formations that are currently in fray, Afrida.
Right, Vinay. And Tuhin, coming to you on that point, and when Vinay says this, that it's likely to stay within that range, I'm going to take his word for it because he believes that we should always err on the side of caution. So you would be happy with that comment, Tuhin. But there is nervousness in all the camps. Our reporters are telling us that no one is going all out celebrating after having learned from last time, once bitten, twice shy.
Well, some eternal optimists like to believe things are changing by the minute, but at least in the last 3 hours, things haven't changed. There is a very clear pattern now. The margin, if at all, is only increasing. And, as your correspondent was explaining, the gains for the BJP JDU alliance is across the state. In fact, even the RJD strongholds like Simanchal haven't really, voted for RJD. So I think the pattern is very clear. If at all, this margin is only going to increase over the hours, and by evening you will see a more consolidated gain for the BJP JDU combined. I think in an hour or so, unless we go by Manoj Jha's word, and I don't know what real-time data he wants us to believe in, because none of the other channels are privy to the figure which he's quoting, 86 seats for the RJD. Probably it's a very delusional figure which he's giving, but I think in another half an hour or 1 hour, we should be able to call the election. I don't see any change, any significant change in the pattern in which the numbers are moving or the way they stand at this point.
Okay. I have Shireen, my colleague in Patna, outside the BJP office. We lost her last time. Shireen, over to you. Show us around a bit what things are like. Tuhin here in our Mumbai studio is extremely optimistic that these leads will consolidate. And BJP, of course, has emerged so far, at least going by the figures that we have, as the single largest party. But what is the mood like out there in Patna?
Well, what the BJP spokesperson is saying in the studio is something that is resonating with the people over here at the BJP Patna office as well. The party cadre here have come out in large numbers. If I ask my camera person to pan and show you, the BJP workers are in fact trickling in at the Patna office of BJP. Though they have been told very clearly that they are not supposed to make any sort of noise. They are not supposed to go into full-fledged celebration, because the senior leaders who are in fact sitting right now at the BJP office, it's BJP Bihar chief Sanjay Jaiswal, who is sitting in the office, and he has specifically instructed all of them not to make any sort of noise or any sort of celebration. But even then, the party cadre believes that that the trends that are showing are in favor of BJP, are in favor of the NDA, and that is why you can see large number of crowd they have in fact gathered over here. And let me speak to some of them. जो रुझाव आ रहे हैं वो एकदम बीजेपी की तरफ आ रहे हैं, लेकिन अभी भी काफी काउंटिंग बाकी है. तो कितना आपको लगता है कि कितना एनडीए कितना बन पाएगा? कि
मैडम, हम लोग 130 प्लस में जाएंगे. ये हमारी आंतरिक हम लोग की जो जनगणना है, आंतरिक हम लोग का जो इंटरपोल है, ये हम लोग का 130 प्लस हम लोग जाएंगे. अभी हमारी सहयोगी पार्टी भी वीआईपी भी 6 से लीड कर रही है. प्लस में हम अभी तो 6ठा राउंड चल रहा है. अब तो ऑलरेडी चेहरा क्लियर हो गया है. 125 प्लस हम लोग चल रहे हैं.
हिसाब से सब क्लियर हो चुका है, एनडीए आ रही है.
और साथ में ये जीत इसलिए मिली है, सारी मीडिया का जो पोलिंग था, रुझान था, हम लोग एक विरोध था. मुझे याद है, मैं जब 2000 में छात्र हुआ करता था उस समय, और उस समय लालू जी की राज हुआ करती थी, गोलियों हम छात्रों पर चली थी। मैं पटना विश्वविद्यालय
जंगल राज बता रहे हैं आप लालू के,
बनाम
ठीक है।
आज-
आपको अंदर से बोला गया है, जितने भी सीनियर लीडर बैठे हुए हैं बीजेपी के अंदर, उन्होंने कहा है कि ज्यादा शोर मत मचाइए, अभी टाइम नहीं है सेलिब्रेशन का।
हम शोर मचा कहाँ रहे हैं, हम तो अपने जीत की खुशी जाहिर कर रहे हैं। ये शोर कहाँ है, ये तो उमंग है, उत्साह है।
लेकिन
जो
पूरी
जनता ने
तरह
जो
से-
मैंडेट दिया है, नहीं अब रुझान स्पष्ट हो रहा है और जीत तय है। जनता ने ये इशारा कर दिया है और मंगलवार है, श्री राम जी ने भी आशीर्वाद दे दिया है।
अभी सिर्फ 25% वोट काउंट हुए हैं, अभी भी काफी काउंटिंग रहती है।
हाँ, इसीलिए तो हम लोग संयम में अभी, लेकिन ये कंफर्म हम लोग एकदम प्लेटफॉर्म पे आ गए कि जीत तय है।
मैम अभी
जीतता है।
25 से ज्यादा हो गई है। अभी हमारा जो काउंटिंग है मोस्ट ऑफली पांचवा छठा राउंड चल रहा है। ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में ही, जो थोड़ी ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में जहाँ लेट से पोलिंग स्टार्ट हुई है, उसी जगह आपका 25-30% में चल रहा है, बाकी 60% के आसपास पहुंच चुका है।
So very upbeat mood at the BJP office, though the party cadre here has been saying that there is of course a delay, but at the same time they have been saying that the pattern is clear and it is going to be the NDA that is going to form the government.
Right. Tuhin Sinha, coming to you on the point that Vinay also referred to, that one of the big talking points has been how the LJP has dented the JDU and reduced their numbers. So, of course, many analysts are now asking about whether the BJP sabotaged the JDU through Chirag to emerge as the bigger partner. And what would you respond to say, to respond to those analysts who are saying that this was always the game plan?
You know, I have a very different theory to this, and I think Pranoy Roy has also just mentioned it. I have been saying this before. Chirag Paswan was going to cut into Tejaswi's vote, which is what he has done. Because if you look at it, who would vote for Chirag? The person who is disenchanted with Nitish, instead of voting for Tejaswi, he got an extra option, an additional youth neta as an option, and he voted for Chirag. So actually, when the final analysis is done, see, we all knew that JDU was not doing very well. In fact, in the morning, I said, even if JDU wins 1/3 of its seats, which is 40 seats, we'll be happy because we are more than certain we are going to win more than 70% of the seats. So JDU getting 50 seats at this point of time is not bad at all. Rather, RJD slipping to less than 50% of its seats, which it contested. I think it's only getting 66 out of the 144 seats which it contested. That is the bigger story of the elections. And Chirag Paswan has actually dented Tejaswi's vote bank.
Okay. Vinay, your response to that, what Tuhin is saying that, this was also supposed to benefit the RJD, the LJP factor. And also on the anti-incumbency point, it seems that it isn't as big a factor as it was anticipated for Nitish Kumar.
Yeah, I mean, look, yes and no. And I mean, I personally would not get into who's damaged whom at this stage because more than half the votes are still not in. So we don't know that fully. I guess by evening, we'll probably have a better idea of who's caused more damage. But having said that, look, I mean, at the end of the day, the one thing that is very clear, and obviously I do not expect either Tuhin or any other BJP spokesperson to actually admit it or not, but this is pretty much a dream scenario for the BJP. This is quietly what they always hoped, wished and actually in some ways planned for, which is this. The only North Indian state which the BJP has not governed or at least not come out on top in numero uno where they have been reduced to number 2 has been Bihar. That's the only state. They've never really been the number 1 party in Bihar, and it's always been their lifelong ambition to be that. And why not? It's a political party. You enter into politics to win. You don't enter into politics to lose. But for whatever reason, they've never been able to do that. In fact, they also have never been able to really build a face of leadership in the state either. Now here, they played a slightly, I would say, high-stakes game, a slightly risky game. Yes. But as of now, I mean, at least 30% into the counting, it seems to be paying off, where the clear attempt was to reduce and diminish the kind of stature that Nitish Kumar enjoyed in the state, because that would create a bit of a leadership vacuum for the BJP to effectively come and fill up. Consider this. If this pattern holds, let's assume that the NDA does end up with around 125, 130 seats. Nitish Kumar obviously has been reduced to the number 3 party. The BJP is now the number 1 party. Nitish Kumar has already put himself on a back foot by claiming this is his last election. And obviously he's a much weaker force than before. The BJP would have thought or would have begun to start thinking of the next step. It won't happen immediately. It possibly may happen 6 months from now. But it is very, very obvious that they're going to move in and look for various options that they are always ready with to assume ascendancy in that state and then make that state their own, because that's the philosophy and policy they've used everywhere successfully, and I don't see why it won't happen in Bihar now going forward.
Yes, Vinay, again, just a follow-up question to that, and this is simply because I'm curious to understand that so much is being spoken about the caste affiliation and how very little changes, over and above that. But then at the same time, Kosi and Simachal area where the NDA in the Muslim-dominated areas have also made gains over the MGB. How do you interpret that?
Well, for that, we need to be very carefully looking at the exact vote shares that different parties have got. What is true is that in Simachal you have a large, Muslim domination in several seats, but that does not mean that Muslims are always in a majority in those seats. And that's where the arithmetic comes in. That's where the game of ensure very clever. And look, politicians are smarter than all of us. I can tell you, whatever else they may say, their math and their calculation is way better than all of us. And calculations in good parties like the BJP happens on a seat-by-seat basis. And remember, when you mentioned caste, in Bihar, caste is not a monolithic uniform phenomena. If you see the history post-independence, Bihar has always had a situation where different castes are backed by different kinds of political parties. So if you had the upper caste, which were traditionally a Congress vote bank when India became independent, so you had the Kais and the Thakurs and the Bhumihars, they were always supporting the Congress till the 60s or late 60s. Then the 70s, you had the socialist movement, where a subsection started getting carved out of the lower ABCs, because the upper OBCs like Yadavs were becoming a little more powerful because of the way the land distribution was happening in the state. And remember, all those laws that were made to give away land, surplus land to different people did not work out the way the governments had thought. And it is very important, Afrida, to understand how important the role of land distribution was in Bihar and the way the castes have reacted to it. And remember, the bureaucracy in those days used to be dominated by the upper caste. So there was a barrier in actually distribution of the land. And hence you see the leftists, for instance, are still strong, or at least are still relevant in a state like Bihar, and they tend to support the EBCs and the other backward castes. Similarly, the upper OBCs, RJD came in and occupied the Yadavs and the Kurmis and the Koiris, so to speak. And Nitish Kumar started the third experiment where he carved out the EBCs from the whole equation and created his own vote bank. So it's a very complicated battlefield, and a very methodical mathematical calculation actually goes behind the choice of candidates as well as which other party will come and cut your vote.
Right. So we'll just take a very short break here, and we'll talk about like Vinay mentioned in an earlier broadcast as well, the way the voters cast their ballots differently in state and center. Is that relevant this time as well? We'll talk about that after this quick break. Stay with us.